The public discourse is a misdirection, calibrated to focus on the kinetic launch. Media reports fixate on Russia's attacks on Odessa's energy infrastructure, or the Chinese military's high alert posture in the Taiwan Strait. These are visible, loud, and designed for consumption. They are not the primary threat vector. The strategic objective is not a high-cost kinetic exchange. It is to trigger a systemic solvency crisis in the adversary. The real vector is silent. According to CSIS analysis, the global economy is functionally dependent on a few hundred undersea fiber optic cables. This is the central nervous system of global finance and logistics. Severing these nodes requires minimal kinetic cost, but creates maximum economic liability. We are not talking about destroying a carrier group. We are talking about erasing its data feed, blinding its satellite uplinks. The protocol is designed to engineer a blind Leviathan, a state with unmatched conventional power, but zero situational awareness, unable to project force or stabilize its own markets. The hesitance of the U.S. to engage Iran, as noted in reports, is not a failure of will. It is a mathematical calculation. The adversary understands that the kinetic cost to blind the Leviathan is near zero, while forcing it into a launch-on warning response would trigger the very systemic cascade it is trying to prevent. The silence is the trap. The official narrative is a war of conquest. The operational reality is a solvency crisis. A state cannot project external power when its internal balance sheet is bleeding out. This isn't ideology, it's accounting. RUDSI and CSIS analysis confirms the core liability, the war itself. The kinetic cost in both materiel and political capital has become unsustainable. An unpopular mandate generates a domestic liability that threatens the regime's solvency. When symmetric warfare becomes a path to bankruptcy, the state is mathematically forced to pivot. The blueprint shifts from attrition to asymmetry. The goal is no longer to win on the battlefield, but to bankrupt the opponent's will to fight. This is not theoretical. The attack on the Odessa region's energy infrastructure is the doctrine in practice. It is a low-cost vector designed to inflict a disproportionate economic and systemic liability on the adversary and its backers. The strategy is to export the solvency crisis. By forcing a continuous, expensive, and politically unpopular bailout of the target's infrastructure, the weak actor drains the treasury of the strong one. Economic weakness becomes the primary kinetic weapon. The core of the asymmetric protocol is not ideology. It is a mathematical equation of lethality. A Royal United Services Institute, USI, analysis presents the raw numbers. A single main battle tank represents a capital expenditure of approximately $5 million. It requires a trained crew, a logistics tail, and fuel. A significant, ongoing liability. The counter asset is a first-person view drone. Cost $500. It is an off-the-shelf platform with a disposable warhead. The kinetic cost of offensive action has collapsed by a factor of 10,000. This is not a linear evolution in warfare. It is a systemic disruption. This radical cost imbalance creates a condition analysts at CSIS refer to as the democratization of violence. The capability to neutralize a multi-million-dollar state asset is no longer monopolized by nation-states with solvent treasuries. It is now available to any actor, state or non-state, able to operate a credit card. For a state facing a solvency crisis, the blueprint is irrefutable. Why engage in a symmetric conflict you cannot afford when you can deploy thousands of low-cost vectors to inflict a disproportionate financial wound? The objective is not to win the battle, but to bankrupt the adversary's response. It is economic warfare executed through kinetic means. The analysis must pivot from the primary flashpoints. The attacks on Odessa's energy infrastructure and the Chinese military's high alert posture in the Taiwan Strait are not the origins of the protocol, they are the result. The operational testing, the refinement of the attack vectors, occurs in the gray zones. Analysts at CSIS document this blueprint. Before targeting a primary adversary's grid, you test the malware and kinetic tactics on a secondary, softer target with similar infrastructure. These regions act as proxy laboratories to calibrate the exact kinetic cost required to achieve a disproportionate liability against the target system. The objective is not territorial. It is data acquisition. Internal reports from RUSI confirm state actors use these regional instabilities to field test the precise level of economic or logistical stress needed to trigger a systemic solvency crisis in an adversary. Therefore, the warnings out of regions perceived as stable are not noise. They are the precursor signals. They are staging grounds for the zero-sum endgame, testing the methods to turn an adversary's economic fragility into a launch-on-warning trigger for their own systemic collapse. The doctrine is designated launch-on-warning. It is a protocol of mathematical certainty, a remnant from a symmetric, bipolar world. The premise is absolute. If early warning systems detect an incoming nuclear strike, you launch your entire arsenal before the incoming warheads arrive. The choice is to use your assets or lose them. There is no third option. This protocol, however, is predicated on data integrity. The asymmetric vector is not a missile. It is a cyber attack, a targeted injection of malicious code designed to blind the very satellite and radar networks the doctrine depends on. This is what security analysts at CSIS refer to as the fog of digital war. The screens do not show an attack. They show nothing. A complete data vacuum. The commander is now trapped in a zero-sum logic problem. Is the data outage a system malfunction, or is it the deliberate blinding that precedes a decapitation strike already in flight? To wait for confirmation is to risk total annihilation. To launch is to initiate a global kinetic exchange based on zero verifiable input. This is the endgame of asymmetric escalation. The weaker actor facing a solvency crisis does not need the kinetic cost of a full-scale launch. It forces the brittle, larger power to trigger its own self-destruct protocol. The fear of being blinded becomes the trigger. The system is engineered to attack itself. The asymmetric escalation protocol requires a test run, a calibration shot. The objective is not destruction, but data acquisition. The attacker must measure the target's brittleness and response latency before committing to a systemic shock. The Odessa grid attack was a public test of energy resilience. The Taiwan Strait probe was a test of military resolve. The next vector is purely economic. Within the next 12 months, a catastrophic, attribution impossible event will strike a critical node of the Western chemical supply chain. Analysts at RUSI model a high probability of a cascading industrial failure at a specialized processing facility, likely adjacent to the Port of Houston or Rotterdam. The math doesn't lie. Crisis is the vector for opportunity. The target will not be random. It will be a facility producing a single-source precursor for semiconductors or specialty polymers, a vulnerability noted in industrial reports like those from ICIS. The event will be framed as a tragic accident, but it is a mathematical certainty designed to create maximum economic liability for minimum kinetic cost. It is not an act of war. It is a solvency test. The results will determine the timing of the next phase.